People can say what they want, but I'll tell you what, nobody has a better sounding theme song than I do when it comes to getting their show off the ground. And I got it. There we go. Now I can hear myself. All right. Hey, Colin, how you doing? Just checking, seeing who's checking in here. Hope you enjoy the show. Hope you stick around for a while. All right, now, there are all kinds of things. I've made a decision. I have been battering this idea around because the show's called Nick's Nights, right? Or Nick at Night. And I thought, okay, what do I want to do with that? I got to take my glasses off. To have young eyes again. Anyway, and for a long time, I thought, well, you know, you got this naval tie, but Nick's Nights didn't really fit with a naval theme, right? So I thought, been kicking this idea around. What do I really want to? Because I've always wanted to have a little group called Nick's Nights, but it doesn't work from a naval point of view. So I finally made a command decision, and I've decided to go with a more medieval view. And if you notice on my Facebook page, I actually put up a picture from the movie. The heck is it? It's about the Templars. It's about the Knights Templar who go and fight Saracen down in Jerusalem in the Middle Ages. And it's a great image. I love it. You know, the hero he's wearing his Templar, his ringmail armor, and he's got his white tunic on with the red cross in the middle of it, and it's he's got his two-handed sword. He's kind of looking down, and he's covered in grime and blood, and you know he's been in quite a fight. And really, I've decided that that's kind of sums us up, the people who listen to this show and to the people who agree with, you know, generally my outlook in life. This is a battle for our province, for our communities, and for our country. So it's not really all that far out of line. It looks okay. It looks a little corny. I don't care. And part of it was when I saw my son. Now I got to tell you a quick little story about my third son, Mark. He's been into the medieval. He wants to be a blacksmith specializing in making medieval weapons. Armor, weapons, swords, daggers, that kind of thing, shields. And he found a group. His mother found it for him, actually, on Facebook. And he's very serious about this. He wants to get the forge. He's already got an anvil. He's got a ball-peen hammer. So he's beginning to cobble together the things that he needs. And he actually wanted me to have a little shed at home. It's like 90% concrete, right? Like it's an old garage. And he wanted to be able to light a fire in the middle of the floor to use as a forge. I said, no, you're not lighting a fire in the middle of the garage floor to use as a forge. There are proper modern forges that run on propane with a little electric fan. They'll do everything you need to do. We'll work on that. Anyway, long story short, he's been in love with this stuff for the last 3 or 4 years at least. He went so far as to go out and buy himself the tunic, the Knights Templar tunic, and he went out and bought himself one of these tin pot hats. Like they've got the little slit like this and little holes drilled in it like that. And when you put it on, it's really uncomfortable to wear. I don't know how anybody could fight in it, because you imagine looking through something this big and you're trying to fight in a battle, okay, with this great big 5-foot sword in your hand, and you can't see anything if it's not directly in front of you. And then you have a shield to hold up at the same time. So the helmet's got to fit perfectly. Otherwise, when you turn your head, and you end up turning your whole body, of course, because of it, it's just, so anyway, that was where I got the idea. But he found this group out of Petawawa, and that's what they do. They put on armor, and they beat the crap out of each other. These guys are all forces members. It's a great hobby. It's a lot of fun. And he, last week, Thursday, he went to his first meeting. So he put on his helmet. They gave him some armor, and they literally beat the crap out of him. He came home. He was stiff. He was sore, but he was grinning ear to ear. He'd found something he absolutely loves to do. So I'm really excited for him for that. Okay, now, as I mentioned in the pre-show, in the warm-up while we're in the batter's box, or in the bullpen, I guess you could say it, if you want, because of the difficulty of taking phone calls from the net, even for those of you listening online, if you want to send me a question, if there's a topic you want me to talk about, either you can post it here. I'm going to try and stay on top of hello Francine on the comments as they come in on the Facebook Live page, or you can send it to nick@latenightcouncil.com, and I'll keep an eye on my Gmail, so that when the questions come in or the topics that you would like me to comment on, I can do it that way. There has to be some interaction between you and I to make this really work well. All right, and we're still working on the phone thing, so that's in the works. But I'm really kind of looking forward to that interaction with you guys, because that's really what this is all about. Who wants to listen to me ramble on for 2 hours, right? No, don't leave yet. What am I doing? Excuse me. So anyway. Okay, so let's go to our list here and get started. One of the first things I want to get into before I get, okay, it's the week before Remembrance Day. It's this Saturday. Now, I've been thinking a lot about Remembrance Day, and I know this isn't on my list per se, but I spent a lot of time thinking about my grandfather. Now, my grandfather was one of the most jovial, happy-go-lucky guys you've ever met. He worked for Leamington Public Utilities Commission for years, retired from there as a supervisor. He started out as a lineman. He joined it after the war. Spent his whole career there. And everybody in town knew him. Everybody loved him. He was a great guy. He had his flaws like everybody else does, but he fought with the Essex Scottish during World War II. And I remember, like, every 8 or 10-year-old, of my era would ask their dad or their granddad or their uncle, what did you do during the war? And he would say, oh, I was handing out canteens. I said, no, come on, Grandpa, what did you do? And he said, well, I went through Holland, and I went through Belgium, and I went through France, and he would tell me just some of the funny stuff, but he never got into the serious stuff. And it was only after I started reading a set of books called The Guns. There's 3 in the series, and every Canadian student in this country should read it, because it follows the Canadian Army from arriving in England and doing its training. It's about the artillery. And Gilbert, I think, is the author of it. And what he does is he puts you in his shoes. He was a forward observation officer, one of the very few to actually live through the war as a former artillery spotter is what he was doing. So anyway, he puts you in his shoes, and you walk in his footsteps through Europe. And it is a remarkable story that he tells. He talks about it all, and he just lays it out there for you, what it was like. And in that book, I encountered my grandfather's unit 3 or 4 times. I also found out he was at Dieppe. Of the Essex Scottish that crossed the Channel, only 24 of them came back. That were either, they weren't killed, they weren't captured. He was unwounded. Of the, I'll say 800 men in the regiment, he came back he was one of 24 to actually get through it unscarred. And then he went back on D-Day. So it's just an incredible story. So I was thinking a lot about him, and I don't have any stories about his action, but I'll tell you this much. He told me one time, I said, did you ever shoot anybody during the war? And he said, well, I shot one guy. Now, I know a lot better now, but at the time he said, we had a prisoner who was escaping, and my officer told me to shoot him, so I shot him in the foot. And I'd seen my grandfather shoot, and he was an incredible shot. So it wasn't hard to imagine him picking somebody off, slapping around a .303 round into the guy's ankle and bringing him down. That was not beyond his skill level. So anyway, once I started reading these series of books, I found out he'd done a lot of shooting. And I have a feeling he killed a lot of people. But he was doing his job. He was doing what he got sent over there to do. He hated it. He didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't something he took great pleasure in. But he did, and he was one of that generation that went and did what he did what he'd been sent over to, what he'd done. I'm trying to say he'd done what his country asked him to do, and he did it. He wanted to join the Navy. How he ended up in the Essex Scottish, I don't know, but I saw his enrollment papers. My uncle had it, and sent them to me because I was interested in finding out more about his history. Anyway, one of the characters I want to tell you about is a guy called Raymond Collishaw. Now, in the pre-show, I was mentioning if they could make a movie out of Canadian history to Hollywood quality. I'm not talking about somebody running around with a little 8mm camera shooting some footage, you know, trying to cobble together some kind of half-baked looking thing, you know, what Canadian films are like in a lot of cases. Now, some of the more recent stuff, like Hyena Road, was really done well. So if it was made like that, okay, which one would you go see? And we've had some great input on it. Somebody said the CPR, building of the CPR. I thought that'd make a great movie. I think making a story about the schooner I'm Alone, the Rum Runners, would make a great story. That you could easily do something about any one of our military exploits. We could certainly do that. We could do the building of the Rideau Canal. We could do just the War of 1812. We could do the Battle of Queenston Heights. We could do the Plains of Abraham. We could do all kinds of stuff. The invention of insulin. You know, the role that Alexander Graham Bell played in our early formation. Believe me, he was a very fascinating character. He was into a lot more than telephones. So anyway, there's all kinds of stuff out there. But this Raymond Collishaw guy, I posted his wiki page on my Facebook page because he is a guy who makes Indiana Jones look like a Boy Scout. I kid you not. What's on the wiki page is a sliver. I remember when I did the research on this guy, when I did answer the call over on the terrestrial radio station, and what was fascinating about it was I couldn't believe what I was reading. Now, I won't go through his World War I exploits. Well, I'll tell you one story out of World War I. He once how did I put this? He was flying a new plane back to his base. And remember, you're talking 1916, 1917, somewhere in there. And navigation was more by guess and by golly than anything else. All the instruments were very primitive. These airplane technology, it's like flying a kite with a motor, okay? And if you get lucky, it'll stay together long enough for you to get home again, never mind the enemy shooting at it. So he's in a fog, and he sees an airdrome, so he lands. And when he lands, he looks around, and there's German crosses on all the planes and a bunch of people running at him with rifles. Oops, wrong airfield, gives it the gas, takes off, and gets away. And he has all kinds of exploits like that. Just unbelievable. He would wreck an airplane. Like one time his controls were damaged by enemy ground fire. He couldn't fly it, but it was like a glider, so he just happened to land it just over near Nancy in France on the Allied side of the lines. Wrecked the airplane, stepped out of it smiling, and was flying that afternoon. The man had a horseshoe up his backside. So World War I ends. He goes to fight with the Tsarist forces under a guy called General Denikin, and he's sent there by the British. Now, he was in the middle of trying to form the Royal Canadian Air Force, but they wanted to support the Tsars because they didn't like the Bolsheviks. And as the war began, it was working okay for the Tsarist forces, but as the war progressed, it turned against them, and it became a rout. So he had to evacuate his squadron of airplanes. So he packed them all on a train. Now, I want you to picture this in your head, okay? It's 1918, 1919. The war in Europe is just over. He's in Russia. The Bolsheviks are coming after him. They're actually overrunning the aerodrome, and he's got his whole squadron of airplanes packed on a train. And as it's pulling out, he's hanging off the side of it with a 6-shooter in his hand, shooting at the Russians who are shooting back at him. That's just one of the exploits. During the 1920s, he goes and works for Britain, setting up air bases all over Iraq and Syria because the world politics was a whole lot different back then. And he had to find out how to resupply an airfield with water, because without water, nothing's possible. So anyway, he gets out there and he says, let's see what we can do about this. And he took an inner tube out of a great big twin-engine bomber from World War I, and when you filled it with water, it held 75 gallons. Now, for those of you young enough to never have don't understand the metrics, the imperial system, the real system, never mind this communist metric stuff. A gallon of water weighs 10 pounds. So if you've got 75 of them in that inner tube, it weighs 750 pounds, okay? That's a lot of weight. So now he drops it from the airplane at about 100 miles an hour. Well, half mass times velocity squared, you're talking a lot of energy. And it doesn't just come skidding to a stop. It hops up on its side, rolls right through the hangar, smashes a bunch of offices, and goes out the back end, wrecks 2 or 3 airplanes. So that's not going to work. Oh, man, this guy. They find a well. They say, well, we don't know how deep, we don't know if there's any water in it. Nobody ever thought about dropping a rock in it and waiting for the splash sound. So he says, well, put me in the bucket, you lower me down, and I'll see if there's anything down there, any water. Well, he's the only guy with the guts to do it. So he gets in the bucket, and they lower him down. He's got this little Indiana Jones type torch, you know, the cloth soaked in kerosene that keeps on burning and burning for light. So as he lowers him down, he notices the walls of the well start to shimmer. So he checks a little closer. They're covered with black scorpions. Pull me up, pull me up. So they pull him back up. Okay, now we advance to World War II. He is now involved in the defense of the island of Crete. He's got 1 serviceable Hurricane and 3 that are too old and need too many repairs. They use them just basically for ground training. Okay, because the guys are flying 1930s closed cockpit biplane fighters called Gladiators. That's what he has to work with against the Italian Air Force, which is flying much more modern Machi 202 fighters and things like that. So he's thinking to himself, how do I do this? Now, so what he does is every night he takes that 1 fighter and he moves it from airfield to airfield around the island of Crete. And he lets the Italians see it. And he makes a lot of single airplane attacks on their different aerodromes all over the area in Italy where they're attacking from to make the Italians think he's got hundreds of these things. So they spread their own their aircraft in the defensive posture all over the place, thinning them out to the point where they can't really be used effectively. On top of that, he finds a hangar filled with anti-personnel landmines. So he gets a C-47 transport aircraft. You know the one that all the paratroopers in the movie, you see them jumping out of? One of those. They're called a DC-3 in civilian life. So he packs this thing full of anti-personnel landmines, and 2 guys sit in the back with the door open, and as they fly over the Italian airfields at night, they're sitting in the back, they arm these things and throw them out the door. And they scatter them all over the airfield. So before the Italians can take off in the morning, they got to go remove all these mines. It was an incredible story, and I've only scratched the surface. You really should take some time and learn about this guy. He makes Indiana Jones, like I said, makes him look like a Boy Scout. Okay, that's got nothing to do with anything I had on my list tonight, but I just thought I'd share that little nugget of history because, man, I am telling you, it is fascinating, and I don't care what anybody says. We have nothing to be ashamed of as far as our history is concerned. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, not much. We do have a few dark blotches. We are humans. But Canada's got no reason to feel guilty about our history. We have an incredible historical background. Our history is far more exciting than, it's at least as exciting as any other nation's history I've ever read. And we just don't, we're so modest and we're so, oh, well, let's not offend anybody. We are not very good at telling our own story. And I don't care about telling anybody else. We need to learn it. So anyway, all right. So let's get to the topics list. A year ago, it was Donald Trump, president-elect. Now, they didn't announce it till CNN wouldn't call it until about 2:30 in the morning. And they were pulling out their hair, trying to find a way to say that Hillary still had a shot. But obviously, that didn't happen. So in the preceding, what people don't understand about what's significant about Trump. Okay, first of all, he did not set the world on fire. Okay? Everybody was afraid, oh my God, we're all going to die in a nuclear blast. Remember that? Everybody was screaming up and down. And some people say, well, he still might. Well, I'm a lot more worried about what's that, the little grease ball there, Rocket Man, Kim Jong-un. I'm far more worried about him than I am about Donald Trump. And if anybody starts a war, it's going to be that little greaseball. And yes, Tom, you're quite right. Canada had the third largest navy in World War II at the end of the war. They had the third largest military. We had 1 million people under arms out of a population of 11 million. That's just an incredible feat. I mean, talk about total mobilization. Try to imagine 1 in 10 people in this country in the military. It just boggles the mind, and what the kind of infrastructure it would take to support that. All right, anyway, so the thing about Trump is that he hasn't been able to get much of what he wanted to get done because he's facing resistance from both Republicans and Democrats. He's shaken the established tree so hard that even people who are supposed to be on his side aren't interested in working with him, and they only do so when they don't have any other choice, or they can't figure out how to get around him. And he's finding ways to get some things done. This tax relief package is coming. He didn't get the wall built. I don't know why. I'm sure that he will, given enough time. But even the president of the United States is more beholden to the Senate and the Congress in the United States than the Prime Minister is to the House of Commons. The Prime Minister of Canada has more power in Canada than the President of the United States does in the United States. I think we sometimes forget that. We expect him just to throw a switch and boom, all of a sudden everything happens. Well, you can do that to an extent with executive authority by writing executive orders, but that circumvents in a lot of cases the democratic process the Americans pride themselves on. So they don't do it nearly as often, unless you're Bill Clinton or somebody like that. They don't do it that often, but sometimes you have to get things done. Anyway, so the real thing about Trump that matters in this last year, and I've been listening to all the commentary today and yesterday about all this stuff, and people keep telling me, keep saying, oh man, he can't get nothing done. He can't get nothing done. No, he got something done by getting elected and staying elected. Think about the effort put in by the Hollywood and mainstream media elites. The amount of effort they've expended would move a continent. They're trying everything they can think of. Why do you think CNN's always on this Russia thing? They just won't let it go. That's all they talk about. They hate Trump, and they make no bones about it. That's why their ratings are plummeting. That's why Fox News is eating everybody else's lunch, because at least they make the attempt to be fair. I'm not saying they're the perfect news source, but I'm just saying that they tend to be a little more balanced than CNN does. So the thing that matters with Trump is the fact that he represents something far deeper that's within the voter of the Western world's psyche, not just the United States. Okay, we saw it in Brexit. We saw it in Austria. We saw it in Holland when Geert Wilders won. He was second largest party in the country. Okay, he is very nationalistically based. I forget the name of the party in Holland, but the 31-year-old or 31 or 32-year-old conservative Austrian that just recently got elected is all part of the same thing. Trump got elected, and Denis Coderre in Montreal got booted for all the same reason. And that reason is that people are fed up. They're sick and tired of having people tell them from on high how to live every aspect of their lives. They've seen these progressive programs tried and failed over and over and over again. They have seen wide open immigration with no checks or balances from any corner of the globe. Hey man, come on in, the door's open. Remember that old Arrogant Worm song? That kind of mentality, and they've had enough of it. They don't want any more. It's like, look, here in Ontario, and I use this example a lot, and I'm going to use it again because I think it really fits. Why would you vote for Kathleen Wynne, or why would you vote for Patrick Brown? Now, he's ahead in the polls by about 10 points right now, but it's 200 days before the next election. So it really doesn't matter, because when push comes to shove, you don't get any difference. I laughingly sometimes call them Kathleen Brown and Patrick Wynne, because tell me what the difference is between their policies. The major planks of their platform are the same. So if that's true, then why would you vote for either one? Or why would it matter which one you vote for? You're going to get the same thing. And Angela Horwath, you don't even have to talk about her. You know where she stands. At least you can say that about the NDP. So you've got this undercurrent of frustration that Trump and people like him, Geert Wilders and the guy in Austria, and that core, there's a core of about 4 countries in the center of Europe. You've got Poland, you've got Hungary, you've got the Czech Republic. I'm missing somebody. Anyway, there's a group of about 4, okay, that make up the heart of Europe, who have all said, screw the European Union, we're not playing by your rules, we don't like this stuff, and they have been, you know, establishing borders and maintaining them, protecting their culture, protecting their identity. All this comes from the same place. It comes from the fact that we have had almost a century now of progressive policies that have been doing nothing but tearing down countries like Canada and the US and turning them into socialistic wastelands where the things that used to be true, it used to be true that in Canada, you could come here, start a business, and be wildly successful. Do you realize, and my wife pointed this out to me the other day, I hadn't really given much thought, because everybody thinks the Americans are the great businessmen, right? Let's play some hardball, let's get down to brass tacks. That kind of mentality, do it, that great American inventiveness, and let's get her done attitude, you know? That's there, but we're better at it. We just don't talk about it as much. She was sharing with me, she until Algonquin College went on strike, she was sharing with me some of these stories that she'd heard about Canadian business and how these guys just overcome one problem after another and establish amazing businesses, all to the benefit of all of us. And I said, you know, we really got, and it's one of the things I want to do, excuse me, in the near future, is start telling some of those stories, because we need to hear them. It's not just the military that we have to be proud of, the whole country. So anyway, so that's why Trump won. It's not, he was he was just had the right blend of ego, arrogance, bombast, and get her done attitude that the people were looking for. He was not part of the inner circle. He could not be bought off. He could not be blackmailed. So that's why people fell in love with the guy. And when he stomped on that report, there we are. Okay. So I'll just get this done. Let everybody know. All right. I do believe we are good to go. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. Okay, for those of you just rejoining us on Facebook, sorry about that. I just got the blue screen to death in the middle of it all, and I had to shut it down and start it all over again. So my apologies. I was in the middle of a good rant too. Boy, I tell you what, I was enjoying that. What I was trying to say was Trump is a symptom of that deeper problem. And if I was a modern politician, I would pay attention to this. Fortunately for us, most politicians are progressive in nature and still haven't figured out how Hillary lost, how Brexit happened. They don't understand what's going on. And that for us is a good thing. Because if they haven't figured it out after a year, they're probably not going to figure it out soon enough anyway. So we're going to have to see how that goes. But boy, I'll tell you, it's I think that when you look at the polls, you learn in a hurry you can't trust them. If Trump didn't teach us anything else, it teaches us you can't trust the polls. They're a snapshot in time. These have certain value. They can sometimes give you a trend if they're taken over a long enough time, over a big enough sample. But for the most part, these small little 500-person snap polls, they don't mean anything. The sample's not big enough, and they're over too short a period of time, and people put too much weight on them. So with that said, I wanted to move on to another topic here besides what the Leaf score is. Let's see. Yeah, they're still winning 2-1. Good. All right. And Nazem Kadri got me a goal tonight. I got him in the pool. Yes, Stephanie, everybody got cut off. I had the blue screen of death, and it was my fault, my computer's fault, not yours. So we're back. All right. Hey, Cherry Tree. Now, what else did I want to get into? Oh, my good Lord. There's plenty. Okay. We are going to be faced. Oh, yeah. Let me deal with this because this is enough. It just makes me crazy. We have now. No, that's not the one I want. I'm looking for. Where are you? Oh, I had it here open earlier. The story was about how Trudeau is satisfied with Bronfman's explanation about this whole Paradise Papers thing and all that. And you know what? Of course he's satisfied with it. Why wouldn't he be satisfied with it? Like, come on, really? The thing that makes this whole thing, like, I don't envy anybody their wealth. I really don't. I don't care if Bronfman has $67 zillion. I really don't care. Why don't I care? Because he's not going to give me any of it anyway. And besides, I'll create my own wealth. Thank you very much. Now, what makes me lose my mind is when they stand up in the House of Commons and they say, oh, we're for the little guy. We're going to make sure there's no tax cheats. We're going to cut taxes for the middle class. And yet every time we turn around, they hit us again. And it becomes very clear. If Morneau didn't teach us this, Bronfman certainly did. They don't give a flying fox fart about whether or not you and I get tax relief or that they play by the same rules that we do. And that's what drives people crazy. I don't think most people care how much Justin Trudeau's worth. Because if the guy is doing a good job, what difference does it make? Like if you hire somebody to do a job, okay, let's say that you hire a $500 an hour lawyer because you've been charged, with some kind of criminal offense you're innocent of, and you want the best and you can afford it, you hire the very best lawyer you can afford. How much his hourly rate is doesn't matter as long as he gets you off. As long as he's there, and does his job. That's what matters. So what his personal wealth is never enters the equation. And it's the same thing with these guys. If these guys were actually good at their job and understood it's public service, not public serve us, there's a big difference in those two words, okay? Then people would they wouldn't care about this stuff. Who cares about the Cayman Islands or the Turks and Caicos or what happens in Switzerland? You know what? The best way to defeat that, first of all, is lower the tax rate on everybody so there's no need to shelter your money overseas. If they're really worried about it, if they were to cut tax, and this is, look, this is an old saw that I keep banging on, but the truth is, if everybody paid the same percentage of taxes, I've used this example before, so if you've heard it, bear with me. Let's say, as an example, you took the cutoff of $35,000 a year. So if you make $34,999, you don't pay any income tax, period. That's it. For every dollar above $35,000, okay, so at $35,001, you pay 20 cents to the government, 20%. And it goes up like that no matter how much you make. Everybody pays the same percentage. Ideally, they pay the same amount, but that would never fly. Too many social warriors would just have a cow over that. Well, look at this guy. He's got $6 zillion in the bank, and he's only paying 20%. You know what 20% of $6 zillion is? You're only making $24,000. You're not paying a dime. What are you complaining about? There would be more money to spend than they would know what to do with. But it's not about fairness. It's not about any of that. It's about controlling your life. It's about being able to bribe you with your own money. Why do you think we get this? We have this 1 year of depressed hydro rates. Cost them $5 billion to do this. It's going to cost them, I don't know, 32. I think the number is $32 billion or $40 billion over the life of the repayment for the $5 billion is going to cost to lower the rates here in Ontario. All because they can't stop spending money, and they're not interested because think about what this means. if they actually got a handle on spending and put some real, not just a lowering of the amount of money that they're spending on, say, healthcare. Okay, we haven't had I don't remember the last time we had a healthcare cut to spending. Everybody, oh, Mike the Knife, man, yeah, he cut it. Oh, it's all his fault. Stephen Harper cut transfer payments. We haven't had a decrease, I don't think, ever in healthcare. We may have cut down on how much the increase was. So every year the money goes up. It's like if you had spent $100 a year on coffee, okay? And you say, next year, I want more coffee, so I'm going to spend 110. And your wife says, look, dude, you're only spending 105. That's not a cut. You're just not going up as much as you wanted to. But the progressives all have a cow whenever you suggest that. Because that's a cut. Oh, that's a terrible cut. Oh, think of the people. I am thinking of the people. I'm thinking of people who run our health care, making well over 6 figures, getting bonuses, while the front end of the system starves for money and equipment. That's what I'm thinking of. All right. Now, let's see. Francine makes the following comment. Would like to see Trump, though, do something about gun control. It's terrible about what goes on in the States. The American Rifle Association, or whatever the NRA is what they're called, should have no control, should not have control over the votes in the government. Trump is rich and should care about the American people and wake up and do something about this situation. I thought something would have changed after Sunday, but was quite shocked that nothing has changed. Look, Francine, I understand the emotion behind that. Nobody wants to see this. Nobody, look, I am not in favor, like I like firearms. I'm very comfortable around them. I've used them pretty much all my life, and they don't scare me. They don't bother me. And I don't mind if my neighbor has 1 or 2 or 5 or 10. I don't care. When you see shootings like what happened down, and we're kind of getting into this anyway, I just thought it would be a good caveat to get into what happened down in down in Texas, where this lunatic walked in and killed 24 people, like 426, something like that. Some of them teenagers and younger. That guy was evil. He was just pure evil. He had battered his wife, his first wife, to the point where she left him. He battered his infant son to the point where he broke his skull. This guy was a barbarian. Okay, it's not about firearms in this case. It's about his willingness to use them to settle a grievance against his mother-in-law. That's why he went to that church, because she usually attended there, and he was out to kill her. When he got there, she wasn't there, so he opened fire anyway. And if it hadn't been for a guy next door who heard the shooting and grabbed his own rifle and went out and engaged this guy and shot him a couple times, that he prevented him from going on and doing even more damage. So it's not about gun control. It's about people who are evil using anything. Ask yourself this. Think about it from this perspective. If we go back to Rwanda, back in the mid-90s, almost 1 million people were slaughtered in Rwanda. You know what the weapon of choice was? It wasn't a firearm. It was a machete. Should they have introduced machete controls? You see, you can have all the controls you want. It doesn't matter, because the people have, if people want to do bad things, they will find some instrument to do it with. And yes, I know a firearm allows a person to be more powerful and reach out further. All that's all true. I don't deny that. But the bottom line of it all is, you can have all the gun control in the world you want. It doesn't change the fact that evil people will do evil things. Always have, always will. And that isn't going to change. What law? First of all, they already have laws in place. What law do we have, or do the Americans have, that would have prevented this? Because he lied. There were 2 things that happened in this story that played into this. Number one, the Air Force forgot to include his battery against his, the charge of domestic violence against his wife on his dossier, so that when they turned up, when they did a background check on him, they would have seen the guy is violent by nature, and he never would have got a firearm in the first place. And Texas refused him anyway. So he had to go to Colorado Springs under an assumed name, find an address. He used his name, but a guy, he went to Colorado Springs, came up with a false address so they wouldn't make the connection. This is the same guy. And that information wasn't available about the Air Force may drop the ball. But in other words, he did whatever it took to get one. He didn't care. If he couldn't have got it that way, then he would have stolen one. He would have done 100 different things. When bad people want to do things, the only thing you can do to protect yourself is exactly what happened. Be ready to protect yourself. Now, we're fortunate in Canada that we don't have the kind of issues. We do have, certainly, issues. Well, let's take a relatively recent case right here in the Ottawa Valley, the Barutsky murders in my backyard. The man went around and shot 3 women. 3 women in cold blood. Canada has strict gun control laws. You have to take a firearm safety course. You have to take a hunter safety course. You have to have a restricted permit if you want a pistol. And if you want a pistol or a handgun, you can't just take it out and use it. You have to tell the police you're going to use it. You have to go to a range, use it there, put it back in its box, lock it up, put it in your trunk, take it home, then call the police, say, I'm home now, and the firearm is secured. We have really strict gun control laws. And yet Basil Barutsky was able to kill 3 women right here in our own backyard. No, it's not Texas. It's not the same kind of thing as far as volume of people that were killed. But those women are just as dead. Those families are just as devastated, including the Barutsky family. All because one guy who never should have been out on parole in the first place. And now, if we couldn't stop that with the gun control laws we have, do you think, first of all, a gun registry would fix it? Nope. Too many people just ignored the gun registry in the first place because they know it doesn't do anything to stop this kind of stuff. What we need to do as far as gun violence is concerned, because we've had guns in one fashion or another since Christopher Columbus. I mean, all of a sudden now it's an issue. In the last 40 or 50 years, it's an issue. So it's not the guns. There's something that's fundamentally changed in our society. What's happened is we have lost a sense of sacredness of human life that is cheap and disposable whenever it's inconvenient. That's what's different. And that's why gangbangers don't care if they drive by and blaze away at an opposing gang member if they shoot a little kid. Because they don't care about themselves. They don't care about life. So what difference does it make to them? And that's what's wrong. We have to fix that. When you start teaching kids by example and through your teaching that all human life is sacred and that you only take it under the most dire of circumstances, like a war, or if the state has capital punishment and there is no doubt about the guilt of the victim, in a case like Basil Barutsky, okay, if we had excuse me, if we had capital punishment, he'd be a candidate. All right. But outside of that, the only time you can take a human life in a well-adjusted culture is in self-defense when you have no other alternative, which doesn't happen all that often. Okay. In the defense of your country, those are about it. And yet we don't teach that. Everybody gets their ideas about what guns are and what they can do and what they can't do from Hollywood. Yeah, like that's a reliable source. Francine, here's what I would recommend that you do. If you can find somebody who owns a firearm, okay, a rifle, a shotgun, I don't care. Go and ask them to show you how it works, how to teach you to use it safely. Take a firearm safety course. Go familiarize yourself with them. First of all, you discover sports shooting is a lot of fun. Okay, it really is. Like if you get a 22 or a, a small caliber rifle like that, just go out and shoot cans and stuff. It's a lot of fun. I have taught half a dozen people how to shoot this summer. Just come out to the farm, we take out the old 22s, and I go through the weapon. I show them what it is. I show them what it isn't. Take it apart. We familiarize ourselves with what it is, okay? And one at a time, I show them how to handle it safely, all that kind of stuff. Walk them through it. And you know what? I've never had, and I have people from the heart of the city have come up, and when they were done, when we put everything away, they said, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, it is. Used properly, these things are a lot of fun and add a lot of enjoyment to life. But like anything else, like you can use a chainsaw to cut a tree down. You can use it to trim the end off a board. You can use it to make firewood. You can do you can use it to cut blocks of ice out of a lake or a river. All kinds of uses for chainsaws. But you can tear somebody up with one too. It's the most dangerous hand tool ever invented by man, as far as I'm concerned. When a chainsaw bites, it does not bite cleanly. But we use them all the time. At least I do. I mean, in general, in our culture, we have a culture of people who know how to use chainsaws. They're very dangerous pieces of equipment, but used properly, they're no more dangerous than anything else. So go out and find yourself a place, take a firearm safety course, learn about them, and you'll be surprised at what they aren't and what they are and how much fun they are when they're used properly. So adding more gun control isn't going to solve the problem. That's a long way of saying that. Really, it is. All right. I got to play a couple of commercials here before we get to the top of the hour, because that's my job. You hang on. I'll be right back with more. All right. I want to deal with something that Francine brought up during that conversation. And she says they do not have to believe they have the right to bear arms anymore. They are not at war. And by the way, I have hunted, but I'm not one of those people. All right, so you have some familiarization. You understand firearms a little bit. The idea about them having the right to bear arms is in their founding documents and is there for a reason. Remember the history of the United States. They had just fought a revolutionary war against a tyrant king, King George V, I think. The guy wasn't completely all there. Anyway, they had fled religious persecution in Europe. A lot of these people were Protestant, and there was a lot of Catholics too. There was a lot of religious persecution in Europe in that period. And a lot of them, everybody from the Puritans to Catholics all said, you know what? The New World, that's for me, because I don't want any more of this garbage. And they got on boats and they came over, left everything behind and never went back. But one thing they remembered was their inability to defend themselves against the tyrant. So the framers of the Constitution decided that that would be a right they would never surrender. And when they wrote the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, I think it's Bill of Rights, they said that the people have the right to maintain a militia and that they have the right to bear arms. Now, these people weren't stupid. A lot of people say, yeah, well, that was back in 1776 when all they had were muzzle-loading muskets. Well, guess what? That's what the Army had, too. So let's assume for a moment that they say, well, okay, we'll just stick with muskets, even though that was 250, almost 300 years ago. And firearm technology has advanced just a little bit since then. if they ever had to violently overthrow their government, and it has happened in history, remember they had a civil war down there back in the 1860s. So it's in their culture, it's in the part of who they are, that sometimes you have to take up arms to defend your democracy, even against itself. Okay, when you get you have the example King George V, you've got Civil War, you've got all kinds of different things going on down there, and they understood that whatever the army had. Now, I'm not talking about, I don't think everybody should have a tank, okay? But when it comes to small arms, if the army has an M16, then it should be completely okay for a citizen to have an M16 too, because that puts them on a more even footing. The government needs to be afraid of the people it governs, because if there's no fear, there's nothing stopping them from becoming the tyrant everybody's afraid of. That's why it's in the Constitution. It's not because they just want to have a 50 cal in the basement they take out and blast away an old car with once in a while. Okay? It actually plays a function in regulating the reach of the government. And that's a part that too many people just don't understand. All right, now, let me go back to my little list here. Oh yeah, I remember now. I lost it when the thing went down. Let's see. Oh yeah, Trudeau. Going back to our glorious leader, is there a better example of a boy king than this guy? Of somebody who is completely out of his depth. The headline says, Trudeau says Canada will not be rushed into signing the renewed Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. All right, first of all, what does he mean by rushed? This deal has been in the works for like, I don't know, a decade. We're not being rushed into anything. What we are is kind of dragging our feet. Now, some people say, it's all about globalism and that's not good for Canada. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay? I don't know enough about the deal to be able to say one way or the other whether that's a bad thing, because remember, we're in the middle of NAFTA, which is a deal that we have done pretty well under, no matter what the left says. And now Trudeau is having a hard time, because now I admit Trump is really putting the screws to him, and Trudeau's team doesn't seem to be able to know what to do about it. They don't seem to be able to bargain very well with the Americans. So there's a risk that NAFTA is going to be dramatically different, if it exists at all, in a couple of years from now. So we have to have something to replace it with. We have to have some kind of trade. We can't continue to carry all our eggs in one basket. Now, we'll always have the U.S. as our greatest trading partner, simply because of the size of the economies and the proximity to the United States. We're stuck together like glue. Whether we like it or not, it's not the point. That's a fact. And our economy depends very much on how well the American economy does and absorbs the things that we manufacture. That's why NAFTA matters. And that's why the Trans-Pacific Partnership matters, because we need to find new markets that allow us to diversify our trade, so that should something like NAFTA happen, it's not all bad news. Now, so for him to come out and say, well, I'm not going to be rushed. Oh, really? So in the background, you've got NAFTA falling apart around your ears, and you don't think you should at least say, well, let's have another look at this as far as the TPP is concerned? And like I said, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but boy, I'm telling you what, he doesn't have a clue. And neither does his team. And certainly, I started out with this when we first went into the NAFTA negotiations. I thought, okay, maybe there is some help here. Yes, Robert, he is a sock puppet who's always scripted. No kidding. Speaking of scripted, we had a lot of fun. November the 4th. Let me go back. I'll find it here. Okay. Do you remember for those of you who are watching following on Facebook, we had a little bit of fun with our environment minister, Catherine McKenna. Now, poor old Catherine, she is a little thin-skinned. And there was a reporter, and was it Gavin? I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, she said, oh, you're from the Rebel. You guys call me you guys call me the climate Barbie, and I want you to promise me you'll never do that. He said, well, I've never used that term for you. She said, well, you promise me you won't. He said, okay, I won't. Well, I know what I would have said. So I posted what I was going to say on Facebook, and we had a ball with it. A lot of fun. Because, look, and I had somebody challenge me on it, because I told her basically to grow up, grow a set, and get a thicker skin. You know, being called climate Barbie is hardly the most derogatory thing that you can call a woman. Like, this is politics, lady. What did you expect? Everybody just bow down at your feet and kiss your shiny red shoes? No. You are in the rough and tumble political arena. And if you can't take that, then why are you in the position of a minister of the crown? They are going to hound you, especially if you're a conservative. Holy mackerel. You know, they're going to call you all kinds of things. You need a bit of a thicker skin. So now she said, what she did was she tweeted out when Syria said, oh, we're going to sign the Paris Accord. And she said, great, congratulations. And then went, oh, wait, that was Syria. Can I take that back? And admitted she made a mistake and claimed it. You know what? Posting her to that position was a mistake. Having her as a minister of the crown would normally embarrass any decent government. And it's like having Morneau. Why is that man still in the post of the post that he holds as finance minister for a G20 country, a G8 country? Because Trudeau hasn't got a clue. He doesn't realize the damage he's doing to his own party and, more importantly, to his country by having somebody in such an obvious conflict of interest in one of the most important posts in the country. So if you won't get rid of Morneau, I'm not surprised that Calamity Jane, as I call her, is still in her post. So you just shake your head and go, please, please stop. So she's done it again. And it never occurred to her when she saw that Syria signed the Paris Accord. First of all, what's going on in Syria right now? It's a civil war. They're shooting at each other over there. So do we care whether or not they signed the Paris Accord? Like, what? What difference is it? Do you think they're going to say, oh, we got to cut back on our GHGs back to 2005 levels, and we got to stop all this greenhouse gas emissions because we know how bad that is for the planet. Oh, by the way, move aside. I got to shoot that guy over there. Yeah, now, what were we saying? Yeah, it's just kind of crazy. She never crossed her mind and say, wait a minute, this is Syria we're talking about. I'm not tweeting anything. You know, sometimes the smartest thing you can ever say is nothing at all. Somebody should pull her aside and say, when there's doubt about whether or not you're a fool, you should not open your mouth and remove all that doubt. If people think you're an idiot, it's best to leave the room that they think it instead of proving it by opening your trap. And she hasn't learned that lesson. Bimbo Barbie, yeah, that's another one. Yeah, maybe. Kirk says, did the CBC's This Hour is 22 Minutes already use the name Climate Barbie 2 years ago for the minister in question? Yeah, I don't know. I don't watch any TV, so it's possible. And so she's such a dipstick. Well, that's an insult to dipsticks, but anyway. Let's see. What else do we have here? Oh, I got to take my top of the hour break because I got to refresh my teacup. Because my tea is now cold, and that'll never do. All right. And yes, it's tea. Don't worry about it. All right. So you guys listen to this, and when I get back, we will have more right after this. Ah. All right. Oh, I guess it's time to come back. All right. I thought I had another second or so. Didn't get my teacup refilled, but I didn't have time for that. All right. Now, first of all, just to end my conversation with Francine here, we're just going to gently agree to disagree, Francine. I know you're taking a different view on that, and that's okay. I certainly don't mind people having a different opinion than I do. I was just reading something Ann said. She said, so true, Nick. Dipsticks have their uses. Barbie doesn't have one. Okay. All right. Now, there's another story about our boy king. Let me dump that one because we're done with it. Okay. Actually, this one is pretty important because John Iveson writes for the National Post. I think this is from today, if I can find the date on it. And his basic question is, are we ready for the next wave of illegal immigrants? Yeah, it was November 7th. That is today. No, that was yesterday. Okay. Anyway, he's saying that if you thought, in a nutshell, John's saying that if you think the wave we had last year with the Haitians who came up from New York State and all that place to avoid being deported by the Americans, you ain't seen nothing yet. We have 300,000 people from Central America and from Haiti living in the United States that are covered by a temporary protected status and are likely to be deported over the next year or so. Now, a lot of those are going to turn north and try to claim refugee status, so that we'll take them in and we'll take care of them and all that sort of stuff. Well, you know what? There's a problem. We can't take anymore. We're still trying to process the ones we took last summer. And I don't know about you, but I think that immigration is a very healthy thing. It's very important for the country at large. But like anything else, you got to do it right. And these guys, these clowns running the country right now have done anything but do it right. They just throw open the doors and just let anybody in with no background checks. Now, I'm talking about refugees, not immigrants. And we've got these people, we have no idea why they're here. We have no idea what their intentions are. Maybe they're all just, down on their luck immigrants who are looking for a new start. We certainly, because Canadians have just basically given up having children, we're down to about 1.47 for a birth rate, which is a problem. But on the other side of the coin, maybe they're here for nefarious reasons. Maybe they're criminals. Maybe they're drug runners. Maybe they're terrorists. Who knows? That's the point. We don't know. So take a moment to read that article today. I won't read anything out of it. It's just as with the National Post articles, they tend to run really long, but they're very in depth. So I've read it, and he did a great job of laying out the story. So take a moment and read that. But I have pretty much been tapped out as far as my sympathy is concerned. It's the 7th. Is it from 3 days ago? Oh my God, yes, thank you, Tina. I forgot about him. Tina reminded me, she said from 3 days ago, but what about the Algerian man who's suing the Canadian government for $50 million because of what happened to him in Gitmo? Remember we talked about Qatar to the cows came home and how this was going to open the door? So first we had Qatar for, what was it, 10 million? Then we had 3 other guys suing for like 10 million each, so that was like $30 million. Now this guy isn't even a Canadian. He went to Afghanistan. He was involved over there. He left Algeria. Now, I don't blame him for leaving Algeria, but he was captured and turned over by Canadians, turned over to the Americans, and interned. He wasn't buried. He was interned in Guantanamo Bay down there in Cuba. And for some reason thinks that we owe him $50 million because the Americans were less than nice to him. Where does this nonsense end? I mean, at what point do we say, sorry about your luck, Chuck? See, this is what's wrong. This is why we can't afford to have this boy king running things, because you know what? It would be expensive. It shouldn't be expensive at all to fight this. If we had a decent judiciary, I'm not saying all our judges are corrupt or anything like that, but he's going to get his day in court. And the moment he walks in, the judge should say, "You're not Canadian. We don't have anything to do with you. We don't owe you any money. Why are you still in my courtroom?" And throw him out as a frivolous lawsuit. That would make sense to me. But that's not what's going to happen. They'll hear his case. It'll cost us millions on top of the award, just in legal fees, because you know that what's going to happen. So the floodgates have been opened. Now the question is, what's the next award going to be worth? So if somebody happened to look at a Canadian soldier over in Afghanistan and then was captured by the Americans and says, "Well, they didn't come and rescue me from those evil Americans, therefore you owe me $150 million. What kind of nonsense is that going to be? It's enough to make you just pull your hair out. Yeah, you know what? Andrew makes a good point. I was talking about families and talking about immigration. Andrew says, "I still believe most younger people don't want big families because no one can afford them. Certainly true in my case. Government could go a long way in incentivizing Canadians to have more kids. Yeah, cut taxes, lower the cost of running the government, leave more money in your pocket. Make it easier to have kids, have one person out making the money and the other one, and I don't care which, okay? Because I've been in both sides of that coin. I've been at home while my wife has been out working. She's been at home while I've been out working. I think that my wife is, and in my case, my wife is better at home than I am. She won't let the kids get away with nearly the kind of stuff I do, but that's just us. But I think that it's certainly, there's all kinds of things you could do to help young couples today want to have 2, 3, 4 kids. You know, now you can, and I'll tell you, Andrew, you can make lifestyle choices if you want to that will allow you to do that. I did. You know, I don't live in Ottawa. Well, I don't like cities anyway. But at the same time, we could have chosen to have fewer kids and have a higher standard of living. Okay. But I like the standard of living I have out on the farm. It's a whole different experience. And all those reasons aren't necessarily economic. And I'm not trying to tell you you should do the same thing. I'm just saying it is possible if you want to. Now, I don't know your personal circumstances, and I'm not trying to pass judgment on you one way or the other. You're the one, you and your wife, if you're married or not, I don't know. But that's up for you guys to decide. I agree with you. The one thing the government could do that would make a big difference is to get out of your way and let you keep more of your hard-earned money in your own pocket so you can make decisions about how many kids you're going to have and how you're going to go about raising them. Because having them is only the beginning, believe me. I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt. That's the beginning of the process, not the ending. Once you're a parent, you're always a parent. And no matter how old your kids get, you still worry about them, you're still concerned about them. So it doesn't end, even when they leave home. But anyway, the point is that the government doesn't do those kinds of things. And that's really tragic. Yes, it's still live, Dan. It is. I had a little blip there because my computer crashed on me. I got the blue screen of death. I'll have to look into that. Can't have that happen again. So it was, unfortunately, it was just came out of nowhere. All right. So Robert says, my daughter and son-in-law both make 6-figure salaries, but with their 3 boys and the cost of living in Mississauga, they find it tough sometimes. Yeah, well, again, sometimes you have to make hard choices in life. And like I said, I'm not trying to pass judgment on people I don't know. So I'm not going to say anything about your family in Mississauga. They're the ones to make those calls. And it's unfortunate, you know, that with those large salaries, if they're each making 6 figures, they're paying a ton of taxes. They're the ones actually paying a lot of taxes that are, you know, a lot more than somebody like me would pay, you know, because I don't make tons of money. So, you know, between my wife and I, we have enough write-offs on the farm and the different businesses that we run and things like that, that we can, usually we get money back. But at the same time, if you're living in Mississauga, they took away one of the tax breaks that Harper gave them with the child tax credit for sport and recreation. That was only $100 a child, but in this case, that's $300 right there off your tax bill. You know, so there's choices you have to make, and each family has to make those for themselves. But so it's possible. It's just not easy, and that's the difference. Yeah, that's right. We pay over 50% of our income in taxes in one form or another, and that's way too much. I love Thomas Sowell. Somebody said this to me the other day, and I might even heard Brian Lilly say it. Said Thomas Sowell's attitude about taxation is simple. If 10% is good enough for the Baptist church, it ought to be good enough for the government. And you know what? I find that, see, I'm not against paying taxes. I understand we need certain amounts of government in our lives to do things for us that you and I can't do for ourselves. Like, we can't negotiate NAFTA, all right? We cannot have embassies around the world and staff them. We cannot have relationships with foreign countries. We cannot have a military. We cannot support airports and harbors where trade travels in and out of. We can't maintain our border crossings inland, like at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Gananoque, Sarnia, the different land crossings across the country. Those things all take money. You know, the military has to be maintained, equipped, and manned. All that takes cash that you and I can't do individually. So there is a role for government. The question becomes, how big a role? Like, do we really need an environment and greenhouse gas emissions minister? You know, do we really need that? I don't think so. I think the Department of Lands and Forests could certainly do that, or whatever the federal version of the MOE is. We certainly don't need a lot of these different things like licensing. I mean, oh my, I've been down this road before, but why does a barber need a license? I've never figured that out. You sit down in a barber's chair. What's he going to do? Cut your ear off? Even if he did. we have a justice system that you could take you and your ear to court, drag in the barber and say, he cut my ear off. Here, see? Yeah, that's worth $500. Go sew it back on. We have a method of dealing with that. We don't need a license for a barber. Okay? And yet you can't practice you cannot practice being a barber. I still never figured that word out, practicing, when it comes to barbers and lawyers and doctors and things like that. But why? Why? Like, if you go into a doctor's office, okay, a dentist's office, let's take a dentist, and you sit down and you have two pieces of paper hanging on a wall behind glass frames with a red seal on them. One of them says that the doctor you're seeing has graduated from the best dental school in the world and was honor student, right? Great big stamp on it, dated, and all the refresher courses he's taken over time all get added on, and they're all hanging there, and you're looking at that thinking, wow, I'm in the right office. Beside it, there's another one that says, certified to operate as a dentist in the province of Ontario. Which document means more to you? Doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. Okay, so, and all of it is because everything requires a bureaucracy to operate it, and that's what makes government so expensive. They get into areas they have no business operating. None. There's certain, on a provincial level, there's certain things that do need to be looked after. Again, I go to infrastructure. There's certain things, health and safety. Okay, I'm not going to say no to that. But even education, is the government the best possible entity in the country or in the province to deal with education? What did we do before we had the Department of Education? Because it doesn't go all the way back to the BNA. What people used to, you know, the old Little Red Schoolhouse? There's one around the corner from my place. It used to be a Little Red Schoolhouse, and a really nice guy and his family and a couple of kids, they bought it and completely renovated. It's a beautiful home now. Okay, but that used to be a Little Red Schoolhouse for the little community that used to be there called German Settlement. So all the farms around us had 6, 8, 10, 12, some of them as high as 16 or 18 kids. They got together, built a little schoolhouse, hired a teacher, and started their own little school. And I would argue that given setting the advances in technology aside and all that sort of stuff, that the basic education those kids got is as good or better than what we're getting out of the schools today. Now, today, you could do a school, if you want to keep the province involved, I don't know why you would, but they could do a voucher system. Give you whatever your share of taxes that go towards education in a voucher and say, you look after whatever school you want, you're going to get to choose schools in your area based on the quality of those schools. Now, this would never fly because of unions, I get that, but wouldn't that be a much preferable situation when it comes to making sure our kids get the very best possible education? Just asking. So you can certainly send me your thoughts on that. Now, speaking of education, this college strike is dragging on and on and on and on. And they're supposed to, if they want to salvage the year, and I'm talking about here in Ottawa, the Algonquin College, which is really causing my wife some grief because she was studying business management and was just getting into through her first semester. She's learning a ton. She's really enjoying it. And then they go on strike. So for her, it's a real pain in the neck because she's losing. But even more importantly, you've got students imagine being an international student. There was a story in one of the papers today about an international student who was supposed to graduate in December and had a job waiting for her in January. Well, guess what this just did to her, her future plans? It just crushed them. What's she going to do now? And all of this whole thing centers around teachers and their unions, or more, let's say it's the unions, demanding more academic freedom for the teachers. Well, that's not what it's about. They want all the part-time staff paid as if they were full-time staff. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're taking a course in woodworking. I have a daughter who's taking a course in fine cabinet making. And she's out of school right now, too, for the same reason. So you have somebody who's going to teach one class a week for a semester on making corner joints and how to make, if you ever pulled a drawer out when the drawer is made of solid wood, you'll see that it looks like like this, but they're all beveled and there's a word for that. And I'm trying to think of the name of the joint. Dovetailed. That's it. They're all dovetailed together. There's a way to do that, to do it right. So he comes in, he teaches, one day a week for a semester, the kids how to do that. Then he goes back to whatever he was doing. You think that guy should get paid as if he was a full-time staff? This is going to cost $250 million to do this. That's what the unions are after. They want to make sure these guys become union members because unions are failing in their numbers. And they want to maintain their relevancy and can go back to the membership and say, boy, do you guys some good favors this time. Don't forget your union part of QP or whatever it is, the union you've got. No, I don't like unions. I'm not saying they shouldn't exist. I just don't like them. Anyway, so that's what's really behind this college level strike across the province. Humber College, Algonquin College, you name the college, the staff and faculty are on strike. And they're not going to get this cleared up by Friday, so this is really putting a hurt on a lot of the kids, a lot of students, because there's a lot of senior students as well. My wife isn't exactly 20 anymore. She's 21. Be careful, you never know who's listening. Yes, dear, I know you're 21, and again, yes, I know. Anyway, so all these kids out there are suffering because the union wants influence over how the school is run and what is taught and by who and how much they're going to get paid. That is not the job of the union. That is the job of the board of directors. And I hope the schools hold fast and outweigh the unions on this. And if it takes a year and a half, so be it. That's pretty harsh when you're talking about students trying to get their lives started, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, my daughter is the one in school is now 19. Okay, so let's say it took a year, so now she's 20. And she's going, oh, but I'm 20 years old. No, sweetheart, you're 20. 10 years ago you were 10. Don't worry about it. You got lots of time in front of you yet. Don't worry about it. But they get caught up in the panic of the moment. So that's my little rant on that particular topic. It was just, I look at it and go, oh man, we have no idea how easy we have it. All right, we're gonna take a little break here. When we get back, we're going to talk about OC Transpo, but I want to broaden the conversation out a little bit into what the heck is public transit for in the first place. Stick around. We'll talk about that right after this. All right, now that's out of the way. Let's see. I wanted to just finish up with this college thing and ask you this question. Does a degree from university mean the same as it did 20 years ago? Do you encourage your kids, come hell or high water, go to university and get a degree? I know for a long time that was the mantra, that you had to go to university, you had to get a degree. And now Canada leads all the modern Western countries in the numbers of degrees amongst its population. Has that been to our benefit? Does everybody need to have a degree in something? Now, there are those who would argue and say, well, getting a degree teaches you how to learn. Learn what? You see, I'm not saying I'm not trying to say that there's no reason to have a degree. Like if I'm laying on the table and my chest is ripped open and the surgeon holding the scalpel over my heart, whose life is in his hands. Yeah, I want him to have a degree. I want him really well compensated. I want him with no family pressures at home. I want him calm, relaxed, and I want him to come from the best medical school the world has to offer. That's the kind of doctor I want. I don't have any problem with having him having a degree. If you're an atomic scientist, yes, by all means. If you're an astrophysicist, yes, by all means. If you're a historian, who does real research, yes, by all means. But do you really need one? In today's world, is a Bachelor of Arts worth it? Or a Bachelor of Liberal Sciences, or a degree from the humanities? Are those degrees any kind of valuable anymore? Because I think here's where I think the money really is. And yeah, Robert, as a matter of fact, I have a son that does the same thing. He says, my son-in-law is a tool and die maker, and he is, as I mentioned before, making six figures. My second oldest son, Jordan, just graduated last year or so from Algonquin as, I call him a machinist. He says, no, it's not quite that, but okay, but that's the best way I can explain it. And he's doing really well. My oldest boy went as electromechanical technician, he doesn't have a degree. He's got a certificate, but he's doing really well. So I think that if you go to school, if I were to suggest to anybody, if I had a young kid in front of me asking me what they thought, I say, look, are you any good at plumbing? Go to school, learn how to be a plumber. It's really, as long as you remember water runs downhill and you can cut black pipe and use PVC glue, run a drill with a hole saw, all right, you can make a really good living as a plumber, and you come out with almost no student debt. And in no time, you're making really good money. There's a huge need in the trades that we have turned our kids away from because we keep insisting on sending them to university instead of college. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Do you encourage your kids to still go to university in spite of everything that's going on right now? Because frankly, unless you have a specific reason to go to university, like if you want to be a doctor, or we have a young lady that is a friend of the family, who she's in her, I don't think she's 30 yet. She might be pushing 30 now, but just became a veterinarian. She's been a vet for 3 or 4 years. Okay, that took a long time, but it's what she wanted to do. So of course, go and get a degree for that. You know, you can't be a veterinarian without one. There's a lot of, as a matter of fact, it's harder to be a vet than it is a family doctor because your patients can't talk back to you. So anyway, she's doing really well. But in that case, I don't have any problem with it. But if you want to run a backhoe, right, or, you know, work in construction, what's the point of going to university? There's better money. If you get good with what they call an excavator, or we call them a high hoe, you know, the great big monsters that come along and they dig huge holes with this big bucket. Okay, you see them on construction sites. A lot of them are used to dig ponds, and they dig ditches and stuff like that. The guys who operate those make really good money because they're very skilled at what they do, and the good ones get hired by the best companies because they want to be able to get the job done on time, and they also want to make sure that this guy stays with them, so they pay them really well. I had an uncle who built, a great uncle, who built all the 401 overpasses between Windsor and London. He was an alcoholic. Charlie had a real sad life, but he was something to watch running that excavator. And if you drive down, if you're familiar with that stretch of highway, going down the 401, from, let's say you leave Windsor, you come out to come see, and you drive to London along the 401, all those overpasses are all Charlie Trepannier's work. And he was just, he was making so much. That's why he ended up becoming an alcoholic, because he had so much money, didn't know how to handle it, started having parties all the time, and the next thing you know, alcohol got him, and it was just, didn't end well. So, but watch, apparently, and I never saw it, but my grandfather and his brothers and his, like my uncles would all tell me he was poetry in motion to watch. He just had a knack for it and made a ton of money. Anyway, so let's see. Ann says the schools have got to work more at telling students there's nothing wrong with being blue collar. Amen. Amen, Ann. Couldn't agree with you more. And there's lots of money to be made. Schools only push for degrees, so students think that's the only way to go. You know, I never understood that. Now, they didn't push me towards university because they took one look at my grades and said, forget it, son. You are not university quality. Go join the Navy. So I did. I was going to do it anyway. So the point is that I couldn't agree with you more. There's absolutely a fortune to be made if you can work. If you're not afraid of hard work and getting your hands dirty, think about becoming, let's say, a diesel mechanic, a heavy equipment mechanic, or an auto mechanic. Okay, those guys get paid well for what they do. Well, Andrew says that degree is about mandatory if you want a good public service job and move up. I'd say to kids, go for a diploma or certificate. You can always get a degree later if you want. I went back to do one at 29. Should have finished the next spring after only a couple years of night school. Yeah, there's always that is a very good point. If you really want a degree, you can get one after you've got yourself established in the workforce through night courses and so on. Might take you a little longer, but you don't incur the same kind of debt. So there's all kinds of avenues open to kids today that I don't think our society is doing a very good job showing them. It's all focused on university, 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 university. And I think we're doing our kids a real disservice. Let's see, what else? Oh, yeah, OC Transpo. How are we doing for time here? Keep an eyeball on the time. Okay, we're good. Anyway, OC Transpo, the headline out of the Ottawa Citizen is OC Transpo confirms fare increases in LRT launch year. That's 2018. So the construction is going ahead. I would love to see, you notice you don't hear any updates about the cost on time and on budget, all that stuff that you used to hear about the transportation in downtown Ottawa, about digging the tunnel. Wonder why. Could it be that it's not on time and it's not on budget? Nah, not in Ottawa. They always get it right. Well, okay, they sometimes get it right. Well, they once in a while get it right. All right, fine. They never get it right. Anyway, the point with this story isn't so much about the LRT increase. That comes with the territory. You know, it's becoming a more and more expensive mode of transportation all the time. It's still cheaper than owning a car. No, I'm not trying to say that it isn't. But they have to now make special allowances for people on low income to be able to use it. That's who it was for. Public transit goes back a century at least. If you, no, you don't remember. I don't think there's anybody 110 or 120 years old on listening to me right now. I don't think there's anybody alive in the country that's that old. But if you look at the historical record, they started out with trolley cars pulled by horses. And the whole point was, okay, that if you could not afford the common transportation method, in those days it might have been a Model T, all right, or maybe your own horse or your own carriage, depending how far back you want to go. Then we, as a successful, generous, compassionate society, decided, all right, look, we don't want you held back because you can't afford to get from your residence to your job. You know, we want to be able to give you a method of getting there. The point was, it was meant for people who could not afford their own private transportation to be able to access economic opportunities like having a job on the other side of town. Now, towns were smaller in those days, but the principle's the same. Now, over the years, for a long time, that was the whole reason. And public transit had to work around the car because car was king. Car ran the economy, car paid the fuel taxes, cars subsidized everything, and 90% of that's still true. The only part that's different is now the cars all have to work around public transit. It's been flipped on its head. And I think we've lost sight of that. It's unfortunate that that happens, because I think if they had the original attitude about this, we'd have a much different transit system. Something that's a lot more flexible, something that's a lot easier for the rest of us, because right in the present configuration, I do not take public transit unless I absolutely have no choice. And the reason isn't that I don't like the bus drivers. It isn't that I think the buses are uncomfortable, although you never know who's going to get on next and when they bathe last. You can end up sitting next to Stinky Pete pretty quick, and that's not something I want to do in July. Just not a good idea. So I don't take it unless I have to. The reason is I like to be able to walk out to my car, get in it, and travel anywhere I want to when I'm ready to go. The car, the automobile, represents a level of freedom that people in the world have never experienced before. And there are those who are working very hard to take that away from us. That's what public transit has turned into, a social engineering tool. That's part of the reason why I resent it. I want people to have access to the services downtown or the jobs downtown or wherever. If they want to take their family out to, you know, one night a year, they can go out to the movies. I don't want the bus to cost them a fortune to be able to do that. All right, I get that. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not an uncompassionate man. But I do not want to have to stand in January when it's minus 40, the wind howling around my knees, you know, waiting on a bus that may or may not show up on time, when I've got a perfectly good car parked in the driveway that in 5 minutes is nice and warm, de-iced, and I can go where I want, when I want, how I want, and stay as long as I want without having to check with OC Transpo. It's a freedom thing. It's a cultural thing. And that's what I have against it. So when I see stories like this about this OC Transpo thing here in Ottawa, I'm not surprised. And that's what the bike lanes are about. That's what the speed, well, I will say sometimes people bring on their own problems. I was thinking of the traffic calming areas. Let's say you go down Lion Street and bump, bump, and 20 yards later, bump, bump. So they help keep the speed down. And that, in that particular instance, when you see those things, it's because drivers of vehicles were too stupid to keep their foot off the floor when they roared down these little streets, and the residents got fed up with it because their kids are at risk and they're at risk when crossing a street if some idiot is running at 45, 50 mile an hour down a city street, okay, and putting everybody's life around them in jeopardy. So sometimes we do it to ourselves. But in general, there's an attitude in city planning that says we got to eliminate the car. But we're smart enough not to want to have, we know we can't do it all at once, but we can slowly over time make it more and more difficult to get downtown in your car. And when you get there, find some place to put it that isn't going to cost you a fortune. Okay, that's different. That's when you see that kind of stuff. Like every year downtown in Ottawa, down the Byward Market, when I used to work down there, you'd lose a dozen parking spaces. You know, there was never any talk about putting up another municipal parking garage. There's one on Clarence Street down there behind the radio station. It's 4 levels high. I think there might be 2 in the ground. So 4 to 6 levels high. Might hold 350 cars. Well, why not add another 3 or 4 levels to it? We've spent far more money on far dumber ideas. Remember the bus barn? They forgot to, for those of you who don't remember that, a few years ago, the city of Ottawa decided it was going to put up a new workshop for the buses. Okay? $94 million. You know why? Because some rocket scientist forgot that we were getting double-decker buses and didn't make the building tall enough. That even if they could get them through the front door, they couldn't put them up on the hoist to be able to change the tires and do the brakes and change the oil because it would hit the ceiling. So they had to totally redesign it. So when they started to redesign it, all the councillors and the people in the transportation committee said, oh, you know, it'd be really nice if we had this, really nice if we had that, and they started doing add-ons. Well, every time you put something in as an add-on, guess what? It has to be re-engineered. Blueprints have to be issued with the change. Contractors have to get paid. The price goes up and up and up. And before long, you're twice the budget you originally started with. And if you'd just simply said, how tall is this thing? We are getting double-decker buses. Has anybody thought about that before they went to the contractors and the architects and all that stuff and the designers and said, okay, we're getting double-decker buses and we need to put about 25 or 30 of these things in this building at a time. And we need lifts and we need pits and we need, you know, all the spaces for the mechanics to put their tools, a lunchroom, all that stuff. Lay it all out beforehand. It would have cost them half that much. So that's just one example of dozens I could cite you about why government is the worst at doing these kinds of things. Now, that happens in private industry all the time. The job I do in the daytime, I go around to construction sites and I check on them to make sure if there's any issues that come up that they're dealt with promptly. Because in the private sector, you don't have the luxury of redesigning everything every time because it's private money you're spending. If we have a client and they want to make a change, the first thing we say to them is, okay, but that's going to cost you an extra $20,000. Oh, that's not in the budget. Yeah. You either got to find the $20,000 or maybe we work with you a little bit. Okay. But all of a sudden, you don't see that kind of runaway situation in the private sector because they're spending their own money. And it makes a big difference. And that's the part that's missing in this whole situation with public sector spending. When the government gets involved, it's taxpayers' money. The taxpayer is faceless. And they write checks all day long, and no one ever thinks about the pockets it comes out of. That's why it's very, very, very hard to have the government stay on time and on budget, whether it's a train shed or a bus shed, a swan shack, those fancy looking change rooms down on the canal. I'm just using Ottawa as one example. This is true of every municipality I can think of. Most municipalities, they're terrible at spending taxpayer money because it's not theirs. Let's put it this way. If Jim Watson had to pay for this needle van, the ones going to run around and let your kids shoot up safely, their drugs in the back of that van, it's going to cost $3 million a year. If he had to cut the check for that out of his own finances, do you think we'd have that program? Not on your life. Because reality would set in and say, oh, wait a minute. That's too much money. We got to find a better way to do that. Really? There's an idea for you. Let's slow down and think about what we're actually doing here. All right, speaking of doing, I need to run another couple of commercials. We'll come back with the final segment right after this. All right. Okay, final segment. We've got about 5 minutes left before I have to play the bow out song. I really was, I'm hoping that even after the show, if you want to make some comments on this, please post them. What story would you go to see in the theaters about Canadian history if it was done to Hollywood standards? Like, I'm not talking about some, low budget B-rated movie. I'm talking about, I'm thinking of stories like in Newfoundland in 1917, I think it was, right? Or just after the turn. I think it was during the First World War. A bunch of sealers, guys who would go out and harvest harp seals. Harp or harbor? I can never remember. Seals, anyway. Out on the ice floes, very dangerous work. Had a whole ice pan break off on them and were stranded at sea on this ice floe. And they went through a real harrowing experience. You could make a story out of that. Now, I think they've done the Franklin expedition. Or was that Shackleton? Anyway, so you have all kinds of explorers that have gone up north, tried to find the Northwest Passage. You could do a story about any one of them. You could do a story, again, I love the idea of building the Canadian Pacific Railway, something out of our Canadian military history. I've given you an example already about Collishaw. You could do one about HMCS Haida, which is still with us down in Hamilton. You still have the ship. You could very easily make an amazing movie out of her exploits. As a matter of fact, maybe to wind the show up, I'll tell you just a quick little story about her. Her and her sister ship Athabascan in April of 1943. 43 or 44. I'll say 43, and if I'm wrong, forgive me. They were on patrol, and the tribals working in the channel always worked at night. And they did it because they were vulnerable to air attack. A tribal destroyer was very powerful, probably one of the best destroyers of the war, but no destroyer could fend off a determined attack of multiple airplanes and live to tell about it. So the Air Force, the threat from the German Air Force was one they took seriously, and they only operated at night. Well, they got into a fight with their counterparts from the German Navy, from the Kriegsmarine. They had what they called E-boats, which are very fast torpedo boats. and they got into a fight with some smaller destroyers. And in the midst of the melee, Athabaskan was torpedoed. Her sister ship, Haida's sister ship, was torpedoed, exploded, and sank, and killed 128 people on board. Many of them were very well known to the Athabaskan crew because as sister ships, they would sometimes berth beside each other. Their crews intermingled a lot. There were a lot of friendships between the two ships. So they really took that, it hit Haida really hard. So when they were trying to rescue people from the water, the captain called out for some volunteers to man the little motor workboat. Now, this is a little harbor boat that the ship would use to run little errands. It was like 27 feet long, had a little small 4-cylinder diesel engine, and it would do about 10 knots. It's just a service boat. So if the captain wanted to go, if they were tied to a buoy out in the harbor and some of the crew wanted to go ashore and leave, you'd use the little motor workboat to go back and forth. Or if you had to putter around the ship and paint the ship at the waterline, that kind of thing, you get a little workboat. So he said, look, guys, understand, before you say yes to this, it's getting towards light. And if you get into that boat to help pull some more survivors out of the water, I can't stay to pick you up. You're on your own. So they got 3 or 4 volunteers said, okay, skipper, we'll go. They climbed in, lowered the thing over the side, and began to pluck survivors out of the water. They grabbed, I think, about 5 or 6 guys, and then started to turn for home. Well, by now, Athabaskan's gone. The Haida's gone. She's on her way back to England because she can't get caught in the channel by the Luftwaffe. And this little motor workboat, all of a sudden, the engine dies. Well, every time you put the motor workboat, there's going to be what we call a stoker, a mechanic. That would be me, and when I was in the Navy, would be there to make sure that if anything did happen, they could fix it. So he's down in next to the engine trying to get this thing running. And while he's doing that, there's a German trawler, a small German surface ship coming towards them. And everybody's thinking, okay, this is it. We're going to get captured. So they start throwing their personal effects overboard, waiting for the shop that tells them, because the mechanic does get it running again. But it's only doing 10 knots. It's not going to run this thing. Okay? And they're about ready to heave to and stop. And all of a sudden, for a reason nobody understands, it turns away. Make a long story short, they make it back to England over the next 24 hours. They were flown over by 2 ME-109s coming back from a mission over England. They waved at them and stood up and shouted and waved rags, thinking they were Spitfires, because from a distance, it's very hard to tell what kind of airplane's coming directly at you. And when they realized those noses were yellow and they had black crosses on their tail, they thought, uh-oh, we're dead now, because the pilots could just turn around and strafe them and kill them all and sink the boat in the process. But the pilots just kept on going. So they got back, and it was one of the most remarkable stories I think I've ever read, and a tribute to the men who had the courage to get into that little boat in the first place. And that's what I love about our history, man. These guys, can you imagine? You're out in the middle of the English Channel, not known to be the friendliest place from a weather point of view to begin with, infested with Germans. You have the Luftwaffe waiting for sunrise to come and see what all the fighting was about last night. And you get into a little 27-foot boat that'll only do 10 knots, and you're going to pull people out of the water and go all the way back to England? They made it. Anyway, with that said, I have to wish you all a good night. I certainly enjoyed tonight's show. I hope that you did too. We'll see you all again next weekend. In the meantime, ubi caritas et amor, Deus sibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.